The 1970 Chevelle LS6 packed 450 horsepower from 454 cubic inches and ruled American drag strips. But 8,000 miles away in Australia, Ford built a 351-powered Falcon that embarrassed it in one critical way. This is the story of two completely different philosophies chasing the same dream. 1970 was the absolute peak of the muscle car era. GM finally unleashed the LS6 big block in the Chevelle, and every gearhead in America knew what that meant. This wasn't some detuned luxury car motor. This was a race engine you could order from your local Chevy dealer, bolted into a mid-size A-body that weighed just 3,700 pounds. The math was simple and brutal. That LS6 made 450 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 500 pound-feet of torque at just 3,600 RPM. Those were SAE gross numbers, the way everyone rated engines back then. Chevy built this thing with an 11.25-to-1 compression ratio, solid lifter camshaft, and rectangular port cylinder heads that flowed like nothing else in their lineup. The Holley 800 CFM carburetor sat on top of an aluminum intake manifold designed for one purpose: getting massive amounts of air and fuel into those cylinders as fast as physically possible. But here's what separated the LS6 from everything else on American roads. This wasn't some compromised street engine. GM's engineers literally took their racing knowledge and made it streetable. The solid lifter cam meant you heard every valve opening and closing. That high compression ratio meant you needed premium fuel, or you'd hear detonation that would crack pistons. This engine demanded respect and rewarded it with acceleration that pinned you to the seat. When Car and Driver tested the LS6 Chevelle in 1970, they hit 60 miles per hour in 5.4 seconds. The quarter mile took 13.12 seconds at 107 miles per hour. Remember, this was with street tires that would spin through first and second gear if you weren't careful. With modern radials, these cars run low 12 seconds all day long. The LS6 Chevelle became the benchmark every other manufacturer measured themselves against. Now let's talk about what Ford Australia was building at the exact same time. The XY Falcon GTHO Phase III hit dealers in 1971 with a completely different mission. Where the Chevelle was built to dominate the quarter mile and look menacing at stoplights, the Phase III was engineered to win the Bathurst 1000, a brutal 1,000-kilometer race on a mountain circuit that destroyed unprepared cars. Ford Australia started with their 351 Cleveland V8. On paper, that 5.8-liter engine looked tiny compared to the Chevelle's 7.4-liter monster. Ford officially rated it at 300 horsepower, which sounds downright pedestrian next to the LS6's 450. But anyone who knew Australian racing understood those numbers were pure fiction, designed to keep insurance companies and government regulators happy. The real story was in the engineering. Ford Australia took the Cleveland block and built it like a race engine that happened to be street legal. They used a solid lifter camshaft with aggressive duration and lift. The 4-barrel carburetor fed a high-rise intake manifold. The cylinder heads were hand-ported and flowed incredibly well for a production engine. Most importantly, they matched the engine to a close ratio top-loader 4-speed manual transmission with a 3.5-to-1 rear axle ratio. When you drove a Phase III, everything about it felt different from American muscle cars. The engine revved freely to 6,000 RPM instead of running out of breath at 5,500 like most big blocks. The suspension was tuned for corners, not just straight-line acceleration. The brakes could actually stop the car repeatedly without fading. Ford built exactly 300 of them to meet homologation rules for racing, and every single one was painted striking yellow with black stripes. Here's where it gets interesting. Motor Magazine tested a Phase III in 1971 and recorded a top speed of 141.5 miles per hour. That's not a typo. This relatively small displacement engine pushed a family sedan to over 140 miles per hour on public roads. For comparison, the LS6 Chevelle topped out around 125 to 130 miles per hour, depending on gearing. The Phase III's aerodynamics and high-revving engine gave it a massive advantage once speeds climbed past 100. But in a drag race, physics favors the Chevelle. That LS6's 500 pound-feet of torque at just 3,600 RPM meant instant acceleration from a stoplight. The Phase III needed to rev higher to make power, and even though it was lighter at around 3,400 pounds, it couldn't overcome that 150 cubic inch displacement disadvantage in a straight line. The Phase III ran the quarter mile in about 14.1 to 14.4 seconds at 98 to 100 miles per hour. That's a full second slower than the LS6 Chevelle. 0 to 60 took around 5.8 seconds compared to the Chevelle's 5.4. In every traditional American muscle car metric, the Chevelle dominated. Walk up to any drag strip in 1970, and the LS6 would have embarrassed the Phase III. But here's what the quarter-mile times don't show you. That Phase III would destroy the Chevelle on any road with corners. The Bathurst circuit has straights, but it also has elevation changes, off-camber turns, and sections where brake fade means you're headed into the wall. Ford built the Phase III to handle all of it for 1,000 kilometers straight. The Chevelle's chassis was designed to go straight and look good in shopping mall parking lots. The rear suspension was a basic live axle on leaf springs that would hop and skip if you tried to accelerate hard through a turn. The brakes were adequate for stopping from 60 once or twice, but ask them to do it repeatedly, and you'd quickly find their limits. The steering was slow and vague, perfect for cruising, but terrible for precise cornering. Meanwhile, the Phase III had a sophisticated coil spring rear suspension that kept the tires planted through corners. The front suspension geometry was tuned for responsive turn-in. The steering ratio was quicker and gave actual feedback through the wheel. Engineers spent months testing at Bathurst to get the suspension geometry exactly right. And that's the fundamental difference in philosophy. American manufacturers built muscle cars to win races that lasted 12 seconds. Australian manufacturers built them to win races that lasted 3 hours. Both approaches were completely valid for their markets and their racing series. The LS6 Chevelle became a legend because it delivered exactly what American buyers wanted: overwhelming acceleration and tire-smoking burnouts. Insurance companies killed it after just 1 year, making original LS6 cars worth serious money today. Only 4,475 were built, and survivors in good condition easily sell for over $150,000. The Phase III became a legend for different reasons. Those 300 cars defined Australian performance for an entire generation. Ford drivers won Bathurst in 1971 and proved the Phase III's engineering was legitimate. Today, pristine examples sell for over $1 million Australian dollars. They're considered national automotive treasures. So which one was actually faster? The answer depends entirely on your definition of fast. If you're talking about a standing start quarter mile, the LS6 Chevelle wins every single time. That massive displacement and instant torque make it unbeatable in straight-line acceleration against a smaller engine. But if you're talking about a lap around any road course, the Phase III absolutely destroys the Chevelle. It would build a lead through every corner section that the Chevelle could never make up on the straights. The suspension, brakes, and chassis tuning weren't even close. And if you're talking about top speed, the Phase III's 141 miles per hour embarrasses the Chevelle's 125 to 130 limit. That comes down to aerodynamics and gearing. The Phase III could pull top gear to redline, while the Chevelle ran out of gear or power before reaching its theoretical maximum. The real lesson here is that comparing these two cars is like comparing a heavyweight boxer to a marathon runner. They're both elite athletes, but they're built for completely different competitions. The LS6 Chevelle represents the peak of American straight-line performance before emissions regulations destroyed everything. The Phase III represents Australian engineering, creating a balanced performance machine that could handle any road. You can own both philosophies today if you've got deep pockets. Finding an original LS6 Chevelle takes patience and at least $150,000 for a driver-quality example. Finding a Phase III in Australia means competing with collectors who consider them irreplaceable pieces of automotive history. What's interesting is how both cars influenced everything that came after them. The LS6 showed that American manufacturers could build genuine race engines for the street when regulations allowed it. Every modern Corvette Z06 and Camaro ZL1 traces its lineage directly back to that philosophy. Put the biggest, most powerful engine possible in a platform, and let physics do the rest. The Phase III showed that smaller displacement doesn't mean compromising performance if you engineer everything correctly. Modern Australian cars like the Holden HSV and Ford FPV carried that torch for decades before the local industry shut down. The focus on complete performance instead of just horsepower became their defining characteristic. Both approaches deserve respect because both delivered exactly what their markets demanded. American buyers wanted to win from stoplight to stoplight and intimidate everyone at cruise nights. Australian buyers wanted to win at Bathurst and have a car that could handle their wide-open country roads at sustained high speeds. The LS6 Chevelle and Phase III never met on the same track, and that's probably for the best. We can debate endlessly about which one was faster without ever having to face the reality that they were built for such different purposes that direct comparison doesn't make much sense. What we can say definitively is this: both represent the absolute peak of what was possible in their respective markets during the muscle car era. The LS6 was the most powerful engine Chevy ever put in a midsize car. The Phase III was the most sophisticated performance car Ford Australia ever built. They're both extinct species now, preserved in museums and private collections, as reminders of when manufacturers built what enthusiasts wanted instead of what regulations demanded. If you ever get a chance to experience either one, take it. The LS6 Chevelle's acceleration feels like getting punched in the chest by physics itself. The Phase III's balanced performance and surprisingly sophisticated chassis show what proper engineering can accomplish, even with a displacement disadvantage. They're different chapters in the same story about humans trying to go faster than makes any logical sense.